Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. I'm Peter Anthony. I am your host, and this is Bold, Brash, and Outspoken. Today, I am here with the infamous Kevin Guest, and I am really, really excited to dig deep. We're going to be going over something that's really true to my heart in this moment, something I see in the community and in our culture, and it's the transition from one career to another of people who have exited their companies and now are building new identities. How does that get done? How do we maintain who we are based on who we were, based on who we're becoming? And I have an expert here to walk you through it. And he's a friend of mine, and he's the baddest bassist in the world. My friend Kevin Guest. How are you today, my brother?
Doing
Thank
awesome.
you so much, man.
You bet. My pleasure.
I'm looking forward to it. I know you brought your book. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. I see in society right now something that's interesting. We've got over 1,000 businesses a day going up for sale by baby boomers. 80% of those businesses will go unsold. I was lucky enough to exit at 39 years old, and today I'm turning 60, so that was 21 years ago. And man, has the 21 years been interesting. The first 5 years, I literally partied like a rock star because I was young, single, and I had too much money. But I had worked, as you know, having for the first 25 years of my life, I worked literally. I think my longest streak was about 290 days in a row without a day off, with a minimum of a 12-hour day. And my staff found me on the floor of my home. They found me on the floor of my home. I had passed out. I was dehydrated, we were trying to launch, and I just literally worked myself to the point where I just passed out on the floor in my living room, and they found me 16, 18 hours later, and it was over 290 days that I'd worked. I went on to build my business, which was an award-winning business. We were quite proud of it. It was number one in its space. We didn't exit for a ton of money, but it was enough that it was fun. And then it was over. And I did what most entrepreneurs do. I flew out to meet my friend who had written one of Tony Robbins' books about 21 years ago. And she said, "I'll help you write your book." And I said, "Okay, great." And I wasn't clear on the book that I wanted to write. And I had just helped a startup. I was bored, so I helped a startup. It was an MLM out here in Utah, and they were binary juice. And I hated the way they built out their brands. They're very, very naughty. And I said, "Oh, man." So I noticed, and I wrote a book called Breaking the Binary. And it sold 20,000 copies in the first 90 days. And then I got a cease and desist from somebody who's now my stake president, which is funny, which is, it's a small community at some point. But interestingly enough, that wasn't the book I intended to write because I didn't know much about that, but it was the book everybody seemed to want to read at the moment.
Yeah.
Because there was a couple of big MLMs launching in the early 2000s. There's always a couple, right? But I didn't know who I was. And I didn't know what I wanted to be known for anymore because I know what I was known for, I no longer owned. I no longer was part of. I no longer carried the title. And I was too young to retire. So it took me a minute to restart. You've been through this process a couple of times. You've had the opportunity to reinvent I wouldn't say your identity, but your title, right? Because people can see you as the owner of one business. Now they see you as the owner of a new business. Sort of like we forget Elon Musk was with PayPal.
Yeah.
We just know him today for Tesla. And now Tesla's phasing out. We know him mostly for X, and which is a drag for Starlink and SpaceX, right? Because he's getting so much interest in X, in Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. So he keeps adding more to his plate while something else is still going on. So he doesn't have that same thing. But generally, we transition out and then we transition in. How did you do it? How are you doing it? And how do you get through it, man? Like it's tough, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are several things that come to mind. First of all, one thing that highly driven people, in my experience, speaking for myself, are not very good at is self-care. And taking a moment for yourself. Yeah. It's impossible to draw water from an empty well. Mm-hmm. And we are so used to giving and giving and giving, we don't take time to stop and put back in. Mm-hmm. And if I've seen one mistake repeatedly over my career, is that highly driven people don't stop to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. And that is what you just described of your employees finding you on the floor. Yeah. And I think it starts there with ourselves, which might seem like kind of a trivial answer, but self-care is so important that we do the things that refill our tank, that bring us energy, that bring us power.
Do you meditate?
I do. I meditate every day. And it's taken me a long time to be able to do that. It's a skill.
I have not developed the skill. I've developed a great skill for prayer, but meditation, I work a lot with Joe Dispenza's work, and I love Joe, and shout out to Joe. You're awesome, man. I haven't mastered the skill of meditation, and I blame it on my ADHD, but it's just laziness, probably. But how does meditation help you?
So meditation is all about being present. It's all about being in the moment. It's not worrying about what might happen or worrying about what did happen or what could happen. It's about being present. Mm-hmm. And if we can truly figure out ourselves how to be present, that's the beginning of meditation. Okay. And being really where you are in the moment at that precise time. And so a trick I learned early on for meditation was very simple. I will sit, and just to calm my mind down, I will close my eyes and I will name the sounds that I hear. And so I'll be sitting here and I'll say, there's the heater. Oh, there's a dog outside barking. I'll just sit there, and for 10 minutes, I'll sit there and just name the sounds that I hear. Which is interesting because I know you have also a very prestigious background as a musician. So you first go to the auditory. Yes. So the first modality that you're learning to control is your auditory, which is probably your biggest modality distractor, right? Because you're sound sensitive. So I would translate that for myself, because I'm internal kinesthetic, to quiet myself. So I would probably, would it help if I'm looking at one of my clocks right now, does it help to maybe focus on one of those things so that you can? Another thing to do if you're visual would be to sit here and say, oh, look at that white wall. Oh, look at that light's a little brighter than that light. And physically name in your brain what you're visibly seeing. What that will do is that will bring you present. It'll bring you here. That's the thing I love about music. When I'm playing music, I can't be anywhere else or I'll mess up. Yeah. And I just have to be in the moment. And if I'm playing and I'm on national television and I'm playing a song, I can't screw up, right? And so I have to be in the moment. Right. And if I'm not, I won't perform. And it's the same in business, it's the same in transition, back to your earlier question. If we aren't present and taking care of ourselves and learning how to be present with ourselves, we will be off somewhere else trying to find an identity, trying to go after something else. I think it starts within ourselves with personal self-care and learning how to be present and in the moment. I think that is the key to a ton of anxiety that's happening in the world, depression, anger, all of those kinds of things. I learned a breathing exercise that, again, is very simple, but it brings me present. It slows my heart rate down, which causes more oxygen to enter my body, more oxygen going to my brain, calms me down. And what it is just, you think of a square, and you breathe in for 4 counts, you hold it for 4 counts, you breathe out for 4 counts, you hold it out for 4 counts, and you do that 4 times. So if you're driving your car and somebody cuts you off and you're upset and you're sitting at the stoplight, do that breathing exercise. I guarantee your heart rate will come down. You won't be angry. You'll physiologically be more aware and more in tune with who you are, and you'll be able to make better decisions.
It's interesting, right? Because what I'm unpacking as you're sharing this with me is you've become an expert at certain modalities outside of your C-suite and your exits and your dominance in business. You've also dominated music, and you're saying self-care is incredibly key and vital to the transition. And I would say, even though you haven't completely said this, it's because it allows you to create a foundation to form your identity. If you're aware of what's going on with you, then you can start to build from there. But if you're not aware, anything you build will fall apart. So then you can never hold on to it. Is that perhaps why we experience stress, but we try to build something again instead of become something?
And so often we confuse what we do with who we are.
Yeah, all the time.
Right? And we see people doing that all the time. Okay, what do you do? Well, that also all of a sudden becomes who we are.
Yeah.
And if we truly are in that space, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
So and it's us and it's society.
Yeah.
So when I started out my career, I did my undergrad, and I thought I was going to go to law school. And I met Tony Robbins. I think I might have shared this story back in '83, and I was like, oh, there's a lot of he broke down how many people were in law school, and is this really what you want to do? And write down your values. And I had a lot of creativity there and entrepreneurial things. He said, oh, what can you do? And I was like, oh, well, I think the beauty industry's, I don't think women want to go gray. And I wrote a paper, and then I wound up becoming a cosmetologist and owning a series of very, very successful and sought after salons. And what's interesting when you say that, people identified me in my culture going back to Brooklyn and Long Island. They were like, oh, so you're a beautician. And I'm like, I don't know any beauticians that are netting $1 million a year. How do you, I don't think I'm a beautician. Yeah. But the interesting part was that's what and you identify with these things that are interesting, but not you. They're a label. And then you're trying to either move towards a label. When I was young, I was moving towards a label, which I wanted the label to be entrepreneur and millionaire. That was the labels. And through that, I was trying to get away from the label of being, because of the movie Grease, beauty school. I didn't want to be a beautician because everybody's like beauty school dropout. And, there was and it was just, that was my generation and my moment. So I was trying to move away from this, move towards this. And the world, it seemed, wanted to keep me where they would understand me, and they sometimes very often don't. And then once you get that little handle on something you think you might be, then you become that, and then you exit, and you're really could be a mess. Yeah. How did you handle it? How did you figure that out?
Well, it comes back to the question of, do you know who you really are? And most people don't know the answer to that question. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about making a major life change with what you do, if you don't have really intact who you are, mm-hmm. then you're going to have an identity crisis. And I think in the world today, on many levels, one of the number one issues facing our world today is identity crisis. And people are trying to figure out their identity and who they are and how they fit in. And part of that is we've never been so connected as a society, yet so disconnected.
So true.
And so that identity crisis is part of that whole connection.
And we have right now, everybody wants to identify us by pronouns and ideals. And, identity politics has been rampant for the last 7 years. So where we find many people find safety in the identity, right?
False safety.
False safety, right? So they're running to be safe, but they're really not safe. They're actually more volatile than they thought.
Yeah.
Because their identity might not be what they're saying.
Yeah, it's not real in many cases. And I don't want to cast a net over everything, but in many cases, when you're talking about transition, how do you go from being in the spotlight and being really needed and all that, it's like a rock star, right? I've been on the road over many, many years of my life, and it's an incredible life because you go into a town, you go on stage, you do a sound check, which might last an hour, maybe 90 minutes at most. Then you go back to a hotel. Then you come back an hour before showtime. You get ready to go on show. You walk out on stage to thousands of people. You play for 90 minutes to 120 minutes. You have all of this feedback of all of this love and everybody that wants to see you, and all of this kind of stuff. And then you walk off the stage back to your hotel room to complete silence.
And you're alone.
And you're alone.
I did that in a different way. I wasn't a rock star. I was a platform artist. So for 30 weeks a year, I would go and perform in different towns. The same idea, set up the stage, get on the stage, perform. Maybe there's 500 to 5,000 people in the audience loving on you and saying, oh my goodness, that's great. You walk through the crowd, they recognize you, and then you get home and you're alone again. And and it's interesting because, Bob Seger has, a really interesting song called Turn the Page.
I know well.
It's one of my favorite songs. And, and you really are, people don't recognize that space in between performances,
And that's where they get into drugs and it's the space. That's where trouble happens.
Yeah, because you're missing, you're getting drugs. When you're on stage, you're feeling that dopamine, you're feeling the adrenaline, even if it's just adrenaline, but it is also dopamine. It's all, you're tripping out on your own music and your own performance and your art, and then silence. And here's the thing, it's the same with entrepreneurs. Yeah. We have these beautiful businesses, lots and lots of people, lots of things going on. And then for me, it was as much as I hated the stress, the silence was deafening.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and I combined that personally with a little PTSD from 9/11, having lost a bunch of friends and being so close to the World Trade Center, being at the World Trade Center 5 hours prior to the first plane hitting was overwhelmingly trippy. And we were just thrown in New York. You were thrown into this thing, and everything's changing. And I'm trying to find my spiritual relationship with this, and trying to identify this very surreal, topical, kind of not so spiritual, idealistic, just. What I think is an immature way of going about a career, which would be, something that's so makeup, hair. It's very seasonal.
Yeah, but as I think about the business of hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really a business of relationships.
It's relationships, right? People, and it's if you see it as healing, and I shared this on another podcast. We'll put it in the link. As the story of when I overcame my arrogance and hubris, and my wings were melted, so that I could come back to earth and understand that I was taking care of God's children, and that was a responsibility and a gift and an opportunity, not the gift of my being a great artist, but rather the gift of my healing God's children. And so I love hair for that.
Yeah.
I didn't like the component where it was so, there was in some cases there's less substance in the arts, as people take it too far, which we saw in the Olympics in France. And you can take an art too far, an art form. And but there is a beauty in sharing your art to heal the world or to inspire the world or to captivate. So I love that. But then the silence.
Yeah, one of the musical metaphors that I talk about frequently is the notion of the encore and the impact of an encore. And so in corporate world, many companies take a 45-minute annual appraisal review as adequate feedback for an employee. Right? Think about a musician on stage who plays his heart out and then there's no applause. In essence, no feedback, right?
Right.
So in the world, something we as humans desperately need is feedback. Mm-hmm. And withholding feedback is, in my opinion, one of the highest forms of abuse that you can do to a person.
Oh, and whoa, you just hit me with a bat. That's huge.
But think about that.
No, I am.
And like if I'm running an organization, if I have a company, if I have my family, my wife, my grandkids, whatever, if I withhold appropriate feedback, that is dishonest, in my opinion. That is harmful. And appropriate feedback is so critical in this whole equation of what we're talking about. And so back to the encore effect, a musician, when we walk out on stage, we know ahead of time what our encore songs are going to be.
Sure.
We know what they are, and we know they're songs that are going to bring the house down and leave them wanting more, right? Mm-hmm. And so whenever you see a musician walk on and then decide whether or not they're going to come out and do an encore, they've already planned exactly what they're going to do.
It's coordinated, it's crafted, right? It has to be.
It is, yeah, it does. And
unless you're Jerry Garcia.
That's right. There are some people, right? But every time I've walked on stage, I know. Now, we don't always play an encore because the crowd, you don't want to go back out there because the feedback hasn't been great. Right. And so we're not going to go out there and pour our soul out more. And so it truly is an option, right, for us to play an encore or not. The same is true in life, right? And as you're talking about transition, so many times we don't plan for the encore.
Yeah. So two things you just shared that are huge. The first is, not giving feedback is a form of abuse. Wow. You got to let that sink in for a second.
Because the withholding of appropriate feedback.
The withholding of appropriate feedback. And that's how I meant it. I meant, when you're sharing something, the feedback, whether it's constructive or critical or loving, it doesn't matter if it's praise or criticism. The feedback, as long as it's constructive, withholding it is abuse. That's a chapter in a book. That's a book. It's an encyclopedia, because isn't that how we start to form the self-conversations? Is the desire for feedback not given. So then we start to make in our minds transitions based on the feedback that we're creating that hasn't been given. And we don't know if those transitions are the right ones or the wrong ones. We don't know to go left or to go right, so we're guessing, and we're in a constant state of stress, hence the abuse. Wow. That's heavy, brother. That was a heavy one.
It really, and if you think about it deeper, it makes more and more sense on many, many different personal and professional levels.
Well, in your relationship with your spouse,
yes,
you're not creating an environment of feedback, and both people wind up living in abusing themselves. Because the greatest conversation, my new book coming out is called An Audience of One, and it's where you're performing to yourself, and you're the only person in the audience. And that's the most important performance.
Absolutely.
It's never the performance to the people. They'll very often be cordial or sometimes be incredibly mean and critical. But the most important conversation, the most important performance, is the one you're having with yourself. The feedback that you don't receive is more painful than the feedback that you do receive.
Yeah, I mean, we as human beings, as creatures, the number one thing that sustains our life is the appropriate feedback we receive.
Genius stuff.
And so
simple, but
yeah, but you think about that, and again, in the context, everybody can visualize a musician standing on stage. If nobody claps, are you going to keep playing music? No.
And are you going to give, if you're in a relationship and you're not getting love?
That's right.
In one of your 5 love languages, if you're not receiving, if your tank's not being filled up, are you going to play that song the next time as hard as you played it the first time? And it keeps dwindling, and it can be completely inadvertent.
Yeah.
That's why I think that this is an entire
awareness.
book or series.
Yeah.
That awareness is key. And then you said something else about transition. Talk to me more about how do you go? You said about planning. This was interesting because I'll give you my background. Short and sweet. I grew up, I was a poor boy with no money, right? Like most of the stories go, right? But I grew up and I wanted to make a difference and I wanted to make money. And I wanted to, I just wanted to be a millionaire. I didn't even know what it meant. But I'm like, well, if I could be a millionaire, because I heard my stepfather talking about it. We had an abusive relationship, very caustic. And I thought, well, if I could be a millionaire, then I must, because I just thought that I would have influence, I would have impact. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what it would bring, but I said, okay, cool. I should set a goal to be a millionaire before I'm 40. And I accomplished that at right around 27, 28. And I thought, oh, this is cool. I didn't know what it meant. I just knew that I hit this number. Right? But I thought I wouldn't do it till I was 40, was the point. And so I hit it prematurely. Then I wrote a list, as many people do, right? I journaled. I was a student of Tony's. At that point, I was still a student. Slowly became a friend and contemporary of Tony Robbins, and because I'd known him for years. But in the beginning, I just would I flew out to visit my brother at La Sorbonne in Paris, and I took my journal and my moleskin, like Hemingway, and I was sitting on the La Seine, and I'm gonna just, right? Because I was a college kid, right? Liberal arts, right? I'm into art and reading and writing, right? So I write out everything that I want. I want to fly planes. I want to race cars. I want to own a video production company. I want to have a modeling agency. I'm going to have these salons, right? I'm just writing down all kinds of surreal stuff that I thought was at 19, 20 years old. And all of a sudden, fast forward, I did them all. I had a modeling agency. I had a video production company. I was performing around the world. I did everything. I was doing celebrities' hair. I was on the cover of magazines. I hit all my goals that I had thought that it would take me until 40. And 40 seems like ages away when you're 20. 19, 20 years old. Seems like, oh, you'll never be 40. Like it's your whole life. It's longer than you've been cognizant.
Yep.
And I hit all those goals, which I think is the worst thing you can do. Because what I didn't have is what you just shared, the secondary plan. I never thought I'd make as much money as I was. I never thought I would do as many things as I was doing. And then I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a transition plan. How would you suggest that people who are thinking about exiting or have exited, what are 3 quick, fast, furious steps? What should I be thinking about in a transition plan? One is I should have self-awareness, you said?
Yeah, self-aware and self-care. Another important factor is the plan should not be temporal or temporary. Money is temporary. Titles are temporary. You think about what is temporary, meaning
all the things that I asked for were temporary.
Right?
I want to own this, it's temporary.
Yeah,
I want to own this house, it's temporary.
Yeah, so if you can get beyond the temporal or the temporary,
okay,
that's a huge part of being successful in the second act or third act or whatever the next act is in your life. Because the company I started, we've done over $20 billion in sales.
I know. It's crazy.
We were the number 3 performing stock.
He's flexing.
You know what I'm saying?
I can't even flex my pinky.
But none of that stuff matters compared to me walking home and giving appropriate feedback to my wife, right? We've been married 42 years, 4 kids, 7 grandkids. In fact, a quick little story, you brought up the 5 love languages. Our 30th anniversary, I come home from work, CEO, got thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of salespeople around, a global business. And I'm just going like crazy. And I walk home and my wife has the book, The 5 Love Languages, sitting on the counter. And she said, Kevin, our kids are now grown. We're now empty nesters. It's our 30th anniversary. You're not the same person you were that I married 30 years ago. So it's time for us to hit the reset button and take a serious look at who we are. And I want you to read this book, The 5 Love Languages. And I'm thinking, one more thing to do. I wasn't into it. But I've learned over the years that if I want to listen to the Spirit, if I want to listen to what is right, I need to listen to my wife.
Okay.
First and foremost. So if she asks me to do something, I pay attention, right? So I get the book, I read the book, go through it. And you know what? I didn't know my wife's love language. At 30 years of marriage, I didn't know her love language. I found out after going through the process and us doing the test, her love language was service. And so now, all these years have come and, 10 years have come, we're over 40 years now. If I do the dishes or take the trash out or do something, I've hit a home run. See, I was communicating with her how I like to receive love, not how she liked to receive it. And so as we're talking about transition, self-awareness, Harvard did a study on emotional intelligence, and they said that those companies that had executives who had high levels of emotional IQ, they outperformed their competitors by 20%.
Wow.
20%. This was in the Harvard Business Review. And so these self-awareness is one part of being emotionally intelligent. Mm-hmm. But as we're talking about transitioning, as we're talking about moving on to different phases and true success in life, it doesn't come from temporary things. Our company has made
gobs of money,
billions and billions and billions, right? That's not where the happiness is. The happiness is me going out of this interview and walking in my door and giving my wife a hug. That's success. You know what? Tomorrow I'm going to have all 7 of my grandchildren over.
No, that's so cool.
That is success. And so,
total success.
So for me, the transition was never about me leaving the CEO role. It's never about me walking off stage and not having the audience there to applaud. It's never about that. What it is about is something bigger than me, which is not temporary.
Okay.
And that's, in my opinion, first and foremost, self-awareness.
Choose something that's not temporary.
Not temporary. And then lastly, something that's bigger than yourself. Focus on something that's like you. You've made the transition to focus on things bigger than you. It's like your prayers change from help me to give the best performance possible to help me touch somebody's life to help them grow, right?
And I think that to unpack that for myself, I think that bigger than you, so we don't, bigger than you is not defined by dollars.
That's right.
It's defined
Absolutely.
by, and you said, and I think that goes to, if we were to put these in 3 levels, right? The first is self-awareness. The second is non-temporal, right? Mm-hmm. That is the perfect foundation for the next one, which is bigger than you. If you choose the temporary, money is temporary, then you're going to get the third one wrong.
Yeah.
Because then the bigger than you is like, okay, let's focus on more money. Yep. Let's focus on better systems. But which is interesting, because if you look at Elon Musk, yes, he's the greatest engineer of our time, but he always focuses on things that are bigger than him. And he doesn't care about the money.
That's right.
And interestingly enough, the more he doesn't care about it, the more he has. It's crazy. You cannot invest in SpaceX unless you know somebody who's invested in SpaceX. Are you invested? Can I get in? All right. I was just going to try. Yeah. I mean, he did 20 billion, right? So I figured maybe a little something for Peter. It's my birthday. Yeah. But the truth is, his goal is to help the world. And that because he sees the world in a bigger way, because he sees in a more complex way, he stays to that goal. It's never been about making money for him. If you listen to him speak, he's like, I had 2 babies and they were both dying and I had $10 million left. Which one do I choose? Right? And he's got this, he sees these things as living, breathing entities that have their own personalities. And I love the fact that he is that way and you're that way. A piece of music touches people's souls because it becomes alive. And I was watching this incredible documentary on Elvis, and probably one of the greatest performers of our time, or the last 100 years, one of the greatest performers. But we never say one of the greatest musicians. He was a fantastic guitar player. He was an incredible musician. He just understood music. But what he didn't do was write his own songs. But then you see Lennon and McCartney, right? And with a catalog of maybe 100 songs, they'll dominate forever. Now, Elvis has plenty of hits, but those songs can be covered and no longer be his.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, it's funny you mention Elvis, because I produced the 20th anniversary show for Elvis that was on TV.
Really?
In another life, I was a producer. I used to produce a show called Turn Up the Volume, which was, a big national TV show. Anyway, but the where Elvis
Turn Up the Volume.
Turn Up the Volume was my production. Okay. I shot it and produced it.
Wow.
But the thing to Elvis and Lennon and McCartney, where they are genius, that people don't recognize, they know their strengths.
Yeah.
Elvis, his strength was singing, connecting with people through his voice, his performance, right? Lennon and McCartney, they aren't the best singers in the world.
No.
They are not. They are not even anything compared to Elvis, in my opinion. Yeah. But as far as songwriters go, they are world class, right?
Can't be touched.
Can't be touched. So they focused on their strengths.
Yeah.
And they made their strengths become their legacy.
And if you look at Ringo, the way he drummed, because he was left-handed, his drumming is almost, in a sense, it's backwards, right? Because he's a left-hand dominant, which is unusual.
Well, that's why he rolls opposite when he goes up.
And that's what, so when you're listening to Come Together, it has such it's so incredibly hard for other drummers to do it in the same way, because for him, that's the natural way. For them, it's a learned way. It doesn't flow quite the same. And to your point, that's when you know yourself.
Yeah.
That's when you know yourself, when it's like, I'm not, I will forever be a songwriter. It's not temporal. I mean, if I'm putting all the pieces together, I know who I am. I know this is, I share love through song, and I write songs of love. Paul McCartney, right? That's what he does.
So just a quick little anecdote. His housekeeper for his home in the Hamptons is a salesperson for our company.
Oh, cool.
And I've badgered her over and over to try and get in, but she's very protective, obviously. But she said this. She said that every day for 2 hours, from 11:30 to 1:30, his house is shut down and nobody's allowed to come in or out because he's playing the piano. He's a songwriter. He's writing songs. He's coming up with material. At 80 years old, he's still playing the piano 2 hours a day.
Wow.
Right? And so
listen to that, guys, who aren't practicing.
Yeah, and putting in the work. The hard, we've worked our guts out. We've left it all in the court. We've left it all there.
And it comes down to that, the books where they talk about the 10,000 hours, when you talk about outliers or just different things. And, how do you dominate? You dominate through practice. And you're practicing. A true artist is practicing when they're breathing. I could not, when I was at the top of my game, I could not stop thinking about how I was going to hold that piece of hair, how I was going to color it, what the texture would like, how it was going to fall, how it would touch the comb, the brush, the blow dryer, what kind of products. Everything mattered, and everything was important for 25 years. I couldn't. Now, when I still cut hair once in a while for friends and family, and because I love it, and they're like, they can't get anything like it ever. But it's ingrained in me. It's habitualized to be part of my soul and my essence. I think it's interesting if we've unpacked so much today, and we've not even scratched the surface, Kevin. You are a well of, not even you're a black hole of incredible wisdom that I think would be interesting to unpack some more if you'd ever think about coming.
Oh, of course. Yeah, happy to do it. I met with a promoter, big name promoter, who was wanting to book me on a couple things, our band. And he said, we're curious as to why do you do this? And he said, the only thing we can think of is a vanity thing, because you don't need to be out doing this stuff.
And I think it's the furthest thing from vanity.
Yeah, I just said, for me, if we can bring awareness on one little point that can shift somebody's life just a little bit, then it's all worth it. So when you ask if I would come back, of course I would, because we're all about trying to improve people's lives in a way that we may never know. We probably never will know. But if we can say one thing because of our experience, man, that's success in my opinion.
And I think that's as I've meditated in my own way over the last 3 years, thinking, I see this moment coming in my life where I know I'm working on my next transition to be. And in order to be, I understand I must give. In order to give, I must first love. So it goes back to the 2 commandments: love me first, and then love your neighbor like you love yourself, right? Mm-hmm. In that, and I say it all the time, in that second commandment is love. You have to love yourself in order to love others. And to your original full circle, I'm doing the Trump weave right now. We're going right back to the full circle, right? But you said the first thing you have to do is become aware. You have to self-love is the thing that we don't give. We don't give ourselves self-care is the exact word you used, but care is on some level, when you care for yourself in a loving way, you change the world because you soften your edges, you polish yourself in a way that becomes loving to the world. It's quite interesting. I think there's more to unpack on that, but I think that starting in that space of self-care and then creating an ideal for yourself within the plan to choose something that's not temporary is the second, and then to move towards something that's bigger than yourself would be the condensing of this conversation, which is, again, incredible. I'm blown away that I got to spend some time with you. I'm so honored. Let's do two things. Let's give a shout out to your book and tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I've got it here. Sorry. This is All the Right Reasons. It's on Amazon.
I love it.
It's 12 principles about living a life in harmony. I use the metaphor of when our lives are in harmony, things work, meaning of we're aligned with our values. If we have dissonance in our lives, we know how dissonance sounds and how it feels. That metaphor. 100% of the proceeds I'm donating to 2 orphanages in Thailand, and all the kids are victims of sex trafficking. And my goal with this book was to raise enough money for 1 million meals for these kids, and I just surpassed 2 million meals.
Nice!
So this is not something that's lining my pocket or anything. It's a book out there that is providing food for children in need. And so you can find it also on kevinguest.com. There's all kinds of media and materials on kevinguest.com, but Amazon is where you can get this book. And it's a bestseller. Yeah, and I brought this for you. That's yours.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
well, you got to
bet.
inscribe it.
Okay.
First and foremost, you play the bass, so I'm going to ask you one more. I want, at some point, my son, I think I told you, plays the bass, and he's never seen the bass played the way you play the bass. So I'd love for you to one day just encourage him.
Yeah.
But, All the Right Reasons, Kevin Guest, it's on Amazon. Go to kevinguest.com. Check out what he's doing. But here's what I also want you to do. I want you to, on YouTube, just search Kevin Guest music, and you will see some of the most incredible music. Now, you do a cover of, was it Rosanna?
Yeah,
you do a cover of Rosanna.
That's a viral. You got over 2 million views.
Yeah, you do a cover of Rosanna that honestly is better than the original. It's incredible. Check it out. It's on YouTube. Yeah. It's Rosanna. Kevin Guest. His band is awesome. Kevin, thank you so much. Bold, brash, outspoken. We love you. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Peter.